everyone. Welcome to our panel. Thank you for coming. I know it's been a long day of sessions. And also a big thank you to our panelists for taking the time to come here. So a little round of applause for every one of our panelists. And so the format of this panel is we're gonna have our panelists introduce themselves and tell all of you a little bit about their experiences and what they've done in the field. And then we'll open it up to questions from the audience and to ask about what you wanted to know specifically about their careers and how they got to where they are. And sort of a way for you to learn about different career paths in the field and how careers have progressed. So any questions or are we ready to get started? Okay, great. So who'd like to start?
Sure. Hey everybody, Joe Beck. I work with CIS Abroad down in Northampton. Currently the Vice President of Program Operations, so I oversee on-site staff management around the world. We have 28 site directors in 22 countries. The team that I sit on also oversees a lot, admissions, any on-site issues that pop up, we handle, so crisis and emergency response. I head up our risk management team and our emergency response team. I graduated from undergrad in 2002. In undergrad, I did a study abroad program through SIT. It was the Coastal Studies Kenya program. And Othman, my site director, really was the most influential academic I'd ever met in my life. And I'm here really because of Othman. He's an amazing guy. I went to Japan after graduating from undergrad and thought I was going for a year. Ended up there for 5 years. Then I came back pretty much right to SIT. I've been with CIS for 8 years now.
My name is Maggie. I feel like I've talked to a lot of you in the room. I'm quite local, so I can do that. I work just down the road, half an hour or so, at Marlborough College, a very small liberal arts school, if you're not aware of it. One of the smallest in the country, less than 200 students. So my role as the director of the international office, the director of global learning and international services, is my title. That's a fancy way of saying we do all the things. And we, meaning me and Dora Musimi, who many of you know, who is my current SIT intern, though she's very much just a full second part of the office, second person. And we do all outbound programming for study abroad, semester-long students, summer grant stuff, faculty-led trips, many other outward mobility things. All inbound students, all international students for the International Student Services Office. We also recruit international students and are part of the admissions team in that regard. And then we also do other internationalization efforts broadly across campus with curriculum building and maintaining other kinds of international partners and other programming that happen on campus. All things international, so just a little unique, I would say. Prior to my role at Marlborough, I was in the realm of youth programming, like at the high school level, study abroad, for about 5 years. Up the road in a different direction at Putnam Student Travel at National Geographic. And my path led me there from being a geography major at college and getting a job at National Geographic down in DC is one of my first things that I did. So I was always like a geography nerd, people communicator nerd, and kind of my path was an interesting one just because National Geographic kind of got me here, and then got me to SIT, and then got me where I am now. It's a very short version.
So I've been involved in international education one way or another for a very long time. I'm probably old enough to be the mother of most of the people in the room, and that's okay. But that makes me have a fairly long career span. I came to SIT and graduated here in 2005, but I actually, prior to coming to SIT, had already been working for 4 years at a Quaker school in New Hampshire and planned and led 4 different month-long study abroad programs all to Asia. And that was actually part of what got me inspired to come. It was like I felt like I had figured out and learned everything I could on my own, and it was like, wait, there's some things I need to know more. I need to come to really learn from the experts. So I came here, and Sora was my advisor for my practicum. But since that time, I have continued actually at times to work with high school students, both as a classroom educator in social studies, but also in summer programs, mostly inbound programs. The last 3 years, I've actually worked with Cy Norton and John Oberleiter in the youth programs, and I love, love, love that work. Last year I worked with Iraqi youth for a month. The year before that I was with students from Belarus, and so that's amazing. I love doing the summer programs. But I also spent 5 years as director of programs for a gap year organization called Global Lab, which was primarily doing semester-based programs in India and Morocco. But we also had short-term programs that we did in conjunction with schools in a number of different places, including Latin America and Europe. I did admissions work with them, I did recruiting with them, I did fairs and all that kind of thing. In the last 5 years or so, my daughter got married and I became a grandmother, and so I've been juggling several different jobs seasonally, including the summer job at SIT. And being a classroom teacher of social studies at Akimo Mountain School up in Ludlow. And thankfully, all of my students are winter sport athletes, so when the winter snow goes away, that leaves me some time to do some other things. And I've started a small program called Meta Connections, which is 4 times now in 4 years, I've taken small groups of a mix of adults and youth to India for cultural immersion service-based programs. And so I'll be doing my 4th program this fall. So people say, oh, who did you do it with? Well, I do it with myself. I've done it in conjunction with nonprofit partners, but I don't have an umbrella organization that is closely monitoring me. I have run my programs, designed them, and I help to do them as fundraisers for charitable organizations that I care about, both a Buddhist center here in Vermont and 2 different schools in Bihar province in North India. So I have a lot of different kinds of experiences. I also have a lot of, unfortunately, experience in dealing with mental health crisis in study abroad and in mental health education here in Vermont. I was on the board of NAMI for a while, which is the National Alliance of Mental Illness. I helped plan a conference for NAMI a couple years ago here in the state of Vermont. A couple weeks ago I did a talk at the March for Our Lives rally on guns and mental illness. It's not what you think. So I have a lot of knowledge in a lot of different areas, and I'm happy to talk about any of them, either now or afterwards. If you think of something afterwards, Sora can track me down, and I'm happy to talk. I live 20 minutes north of here. I remembered where we
My name is Jessa, and I work in the admission office at Putney School, which is just up the road. It's a boarding high school, 9th to 12th grade. It's a progressive school, so the educational design is remarkably different than most New England boarding schools. I have been there since I graduated from SIT in 2013. And I do a lot of different things there. Because it's a small boarding school, you often wear a lot of different hats. I've done a lot of traveling to recruit international students. I've been to Asia a few times, specifically to Vietnam, Korea, and Japan. And I also work with the international student director in orientation and the International Ambassadors Program, which is a program for current students, working with incoming students and also planning fun things on campus. I took a group of students to France last year for the trimester abroad, which was quite fun. And in moving forward, and this is totally the SIT coming out, and sort of this critical lens on the programs, we have all these new international programs. They've been another SIT grad who was the assistant dean of students. We started at the same time. He started these programs abroad working on the student life side of things. He's now gone and done some really cool things. And these programs are becoming very robust, and the students are going abroad and doing all these cool things. And because we're this progressive school, it's sort of like students are going to do all this experiential learning, and it's just going to sort of happen. And I know that that's not true, and especially having taken these students to France, and seeing that it's like sort of a missed opportunity in some ways. My work moving forward will also have something to do with attaching the curriculum that students need to do anyway to these programs abroad, and also other experiential opportunities that they have. I really like being at Putney School because there's a serious commitment to cultural fluency, and that's pervasive through everything. It's also a strong commitment to social justice, and students are having hard conversations, and there's a lot of dialogue and some friction at times, and there's good stuff going on up there. Prior to being at Putney School and SIT, I lived abroad for quite a few years as a Peace Corps volunteer and in Jamaica doing environmental education work. And then also I lived in Honduras doing some environmental work and teaching and ecotourism. And then other nonprofit education work in Portland, Oregon, where I'm from. And I think that it's being in this boarding school world where tuition is $56,000 a year. I think I can see that I'm committed to the idea of doing things for the people, and not just this very small 1% of people that can afford to go to school at Putney School or any boarding school for that. And also it's nice to know that it is a big price tag, so it better be quality what we're putting out there, especially for programs abroad, and curriculum being a strong interest of mine.
We'll open it up to questions from the audience, no?
I had a question for Michelle specifically, but happy for you all to speak to this. So we just went through a crisis management simulation today, so that's really fresh in my mind. And particularly with Michelle, your programs that you run in India, and you're working with nonprofit organizations. How does your what does your crisis management plan look like? Who do you rely on for support when it's such a small organization?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit a year-by-year basis. I mean, every year, there are 2 itineraries I've done when I've taken students to North India, and in both of those places, it's very limited destinations. We fly into New Delhi, and one we go north up to Dharamsala and come back, the other we go over to the east and go to Varanasi and Bodh Gaya. So it's really 1 city or 2 cities on the one trip and 3 cities on the other trip. So in both of those cases, I make sure I know what are the resources, where, I mean, like Joe was talking about, where are the hospitals, where are they going to have English speakers? The U.S., the State Department websites can actually help you with referrals for those kind of things. When you actually are in a crisis, it isn't always as helpful as you would wish. But I require all my people to have insurance, but they don't always necessarily have the same insurance policy. So that's a little bit tricky, but I gather I'm dealing with a mix of adults and youth, but mostly adults. But I tell people you have to have insurance and you have to give me, so I have a cheat sheet of everybody's data that I bring with me, and I carry that stupid folder with me everywhere. So if somebody would, God forbid, get hit by a car, I would be able to deal with it right then. But for the most part, I mean, as a person running a very small organization with 1 partner, mostly the person is not traveling with me, I'm mostly on my own. So, I mean, I have a wealth of knowledge, not to be bragging or whatever, but I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. And so, when I do have a crisis, I have been able to figure out what it is, and I have had to evacuate people, and I did evacuate people. But if the question is there an easy, perfect, wonderful support system that will help you with all your problems? I haven't exactly found it. It's a little bit of a case-by-case basis. I mean, I was telling Joe at the break, the last time I was in India, actually, I did have to evacuate somebody because of a psychotic episode, which began while we were in the field. And I called the American Embassy and I said, I need help. This person has jumped out of the van, is on the side of the road. Can you send somebody to help me? He is truly in danger. And they said, that's not our problem. That's not what we do. And I said, well, what do I do? And they said, well, you probably better figure out how to get him back in the van. But so not helpful. So not helpful. So not helpful. So I called the insurance company that I have this international insurance, and I know I have the same policy as this person. And I call them, and I get them on the phone, thank goodness. And I say, oh, we're going to need help. This policy has has health evacuation, because that was one of the things I said. Make sure your policy has health evacuation. So we check that everybody has evacuation. My mother was actually saved by evacuation on leading a study abroad trip herself. So that is required for my participants. You have to have up to $50,000 coverage to be evacuated. Well, what we found out while I'm sitting there on the phone with my person running around in the field is that mental health is not covered. In the US, we now have mental health parity. Well, I don't know, I shouldn't say that because maybe with the political changes, I don't know if that's still true. But under Obamacare, mental health parity, mental health coverage is supposed to be covered the same as physical health issues. But in study abroad, they're not required to cover it in the same way. So I unfortunately found out in the field that mental health evacuation is not covered in the same way as health evacuation. Joe said there are study abroad policies that will cover that. Absolutely make sure you have that. That's something I just learned today, so it was very helpful for me to come here. But yeah, do your homework before you go. Sorry?
It's hard to get the person in the van.
Yeah.
I had another person who was traveling, one of the people in my program, thank goodness, was actually a person who works in mental health at the Howard Center up in northern Vermont. He happened to be traveling, he was also a yoga teacher. He came out and was my ally, and he went and talked the person into getting, not into the van, but into another vehicle, which we then transported. I was in the van behind him, and then we ended up basically with support of the mental health worker from Burlington, who wasn't officially leading the program, but who was along and got along very well with this person. And then also the program partner that was in Bodh Gaya at that time with me, he also had a good relationship with this person. And so with the three of us, we talked him into voluntarily evacuating. We went to a hospital the next morning, we got an airplane ticket, and then we voluntarily evacuated him. But nobody, yeah. If it had only been me, honestly, if I didn't have that, I don't know what, I mean, we might still be sitting there on the side of the road. It was very difficult. That's why I didn't take anybody to India last year. I needed a year off. But now I'm ready again. I'm going in the fall and I'm doing my homework, and God willing, it will all be well. But yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I probably have the same question for the other three, especially Maggie, because I know at Marlboro College that student can pick their own program and sort of like design their own program. So how do you help students with crisis management when you're actually sitting in Marlboro College?
Yeah, good question. So, because Marlboro doesn't have like a pre-approved list of programs that they can go on, they can design their own fieldwork and be gone for a year by themselves. Or they could go on a study abroad program that is, has more infrastructure. But for those specific cases, for students that are just doing their own fieldwork, today was actually the deadline for this, they have to submit a very intensive proposal of where they're going to be, what they're going to do, why they're going to do it, their health and safety considerations, their timeline, all of their contacts, all that stuff. So the first step is them proving competency and that us feeling good about sending it out into the world. But then in terms of crisis management, it's actually pretty similar to any other student in the field. They go through the same liability paperwork and pre-departure orientation, as well as information of enrolling in STEP, the State Department. What does STEP stand for? Safe Traveler Enrollment Program. Is that right? and so there's always people on the ground at Marlboro. It's not just me that are on call all the time, especially if there's Marlboro specific trips that go up and we're like really on call. But they know how and who to get a hold of at Marlboro, and they also have to have, similar to like when you guys go on practicum, a supervisor, like someone overseeing some of their projects. They have to have a local contact person that we can also get in touch with. So we have to be able to know one other person in the place that they're at, that we can get in contact with them if for some reason they're not getting in contact with us. Yeah. There's probably a bunch of other little things, part of the process, but.
For Jessa, I was wondering what sort of content do you provide international students on campus for programming and such?
Inbound students.
Yeah, inbound.
So what we do, students that are coming to Putney School are enrolling as a student at the Putney School, right? So it's, we rarely have students that are there just for a short period of time. And those students that we do have there for just a short period of time are still enrolling in the whole program. So that's already set because it's already for students. But for international students specifically, we have an orientation program for them. And it starts over the summer when they are paired with an international ambassador, current student, could be a domestic student or an international student, and they Skype with them, with the incoming student, and there's sort of arbitrary pairings. Maybe there's some personality connection, and we sort of do that on purpose. It's not like we're trying to provide country-specific pairings or anything like that, or grade or gender or anything. And we asked the ambassadors to have maybe 4 Skype conversations this summer, ideally, and they're programmed out. So it tells, like, when you, like, in this first conversation, talk about these things, and then it'll get more and more specific as their departure date gets closer. And those work to varying degrees with vacation schedules and stuff like that. But generally, students will have at least 2 conversations with the student prior to their coming to Putney. Then international students get there maybe 3 days before new domestic students. And we have an orientation that is great for all the student leaders are on campus at that time. So that includes, like, there's probably like 50 students that are already there, including the international ambassadors, which of course they're so excited to meet in person. And it's really nice, so they can get over jet lag, that's huge. We take them to Keene to get bedding and things like that that they don't bring in their suitcase. We take them on a great little march up Putney Mountain and to have lunch, and then down to the Covered Bridge on the West River, and then into Brattleboro and walk down Main Street and through Putney, so they can get a sense of this area. And then by the time the new domestic students arrive, they sort of feel like they have a handle on this place in a little bit different of a way. And the jet lag is passed to some extent, and they've gotten a chance to know each other. We also have our the Director of Counseling Services do a session with them, which is really super simple, and it's about making friends and how do we make friends, and just simple ask following up questions. It's really simple, and it's amazing how helpful that 30-minute session is. They also meet with the tech office and learn how to use their email and stuff like that. And then this has been an evolving thing that we've sort of, Olivia Holmes and I have, who's also an SIT grad, we've been putting together for a few years now. And this year we started having these meetings with the international ambassadors and the new international students once the school year is underway. Because what happens is once the school year goes, it's a million miles a minute, and the honeymoon phase wears off, and these kids are like, are you kidding me? Why am I here? And so we had them, and the international ambassadors decided they didn't want, it was more useful if Libby and I were not there, but if it was just the students all together. And so we got them a bunch of donuts, and they went off and did whatever they did, but just to check in and see like what's going on and what issues are coming up, and are you able to talk to your advisor, and like really just have a good heart-to-heart. And I think it would behoove us next year to do it again, like after, like maybe at the 6-week point and the 12-week point, something like that. So that's
great.
international student orientation.
One follow-up question, sorry.
Sure, that's how we make friends.
Then this is my last question. Do you, I'm sure you do, as part of Putney School, take the international students to cultural events or that sort of thing periodically through the year?
Yeah, and it's not specifically international students. It's open to, like, all of these sorts of things are open to the whole school, and it's sort of like whoever takes advantage of them. It's one thing about boarding school is that there's school on Saturdays, and so they're there all the time and really busy, and we do things on the weekends and stuff like that. But there are long breaks, and there's a lot of breaks, and international students don't always go home for those breaks, and so there's, and this is at all boarding schools around here, there's like 75,000 boarding schools around here. And so there's something called Student Cultural Exchange that's around here, and they provide wonderful things, programs for our international students over these breaks that are cultural often. They'll take them to Disneyland or to Boston or to go visit colleges, or they do all kinds of stuff with them, which is really cool. And we also will have families, whether they live in New York City or if they live in Putney, Vermont, that will host those international students for those breaks also. So they get to like have that homestay experience also.
Thank you.
I guess this is for anyone who can answer. In terms of mental health, and I'm looking at this from the international student perspective side, what kind of support nowadays is given to international students, especially when some cultures do not practice or counseling is even stigmatized? And even so, just different indicators of mental health is very different depending on which culture you're working with, where like, stress can look like a student being just very studious, but it's actually something deeper than that. I'm guessing like the orientation process is very pivotal to bring that to light. What kind of steps, I guess, are necessary?
Part of our admission process for all students is a screening of this sort of thing, right? And it is never one time have I had an international family disclose that there's ever been any sort of counseling support. And there was one time when we specifically needed to see something because of other things that were coming up in the application. And the family just pulled out of the application process entirely, which, I mean, leads me to believe that there's a lot that we don't know about, right?
Yeah.
So I don't really have an answer.
Well, I can just speak a tiny bit to that. I mean, I do the World Learning Programs in the summer, and I'm not involved in the front end, the screening process. I'm involved with when they land here, what we do with them. But we do, one of the things that we do is, it's kind of like Joe was talking at the beginning of his session, it's really important to develop a good rapport with them early on and to make sure they feel connected and they feel open. And also that we do put out there things like, you're going to be experiencing things different than you've experienced in your life before. And you're going to feel some different kind of stresses. And if that ever feels super uncomfortable for you and you feel really confused, if you ever even for a second a thought that of self-harm or severe depression that you can't, I mean, if you have any extreme thoughts, please come and talk to one of us. Don't just talk to each other, talk to one of us. And also, if you among yourselves are experiencing stress and you say something to each other, also come and tell us, because we want to help you. So we're not saying, oh, we think you have depression, anxiety, and bipolar. We're not going to put labels on people, but we're concerned about what you're feeling because this is a new situation. And please come to us so we can help you make your experience better. So, I mean, really, that's all we can do on this end, because that's all we can do on this end, is to make the conversation open so that we will have information and also so that students will help each other and bring information to the faculty perspective.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
When you're looking at U.S. higher education and entering into college or university, by law, U.S. law, we can't ask particular things. So we just have to be very clear about how we provide opportunities for them to self-disclose directly to that department or office on campus. So we make sure that that's part of when I'm sending out that I-20, that Form I-20, and all that information on pre-arrival, that's something, it's part of many things that they can self-identify or not. As well, rarely do we see self-identifying. It usually presents itself once they're already here. And so we just have to be different, you know, it's a little bit, we have to be careful of US law and what we can or cannot ask for. We never can ask for anything, but just always being consistent about making those things available for them. And then education once they are on campus, and that's through residential life and different places across campus.
So things that we have in place for, again, this is for all students, but this is, the international students are just as much part of the community as anybody else. We have a counseling center, students can go to that. One thing that Putney has that I think is really quite cool and also unique is something called Sanctuary. And it's if a student is at harm for any reason, they can, and I'm their friend, if say you're in trouble and you're like, maybe you've like drank way too much alcohol, or you are like self-harming or anything. Or maybe I'm just really worried about you because you haven't eaten a meal in 10 days or whatever it is. I can go to the head of school, the dean of students, and call Sanctuary on my friend. And it's completely anonymous. Nobody will ever know that I was part of the deal. That person is not going to get in trouble for anything, even if like drugs and alcohol related. It's not going to be a strike against them, which is part of our discipline policy, because it's really coming from a place of like, I'm really worried about this person. And so Sanctuary cases is how a lot of this this stress that boils over, that was never self-declared, comes to life, and it's really an incredibly helpful thing that's set up.
I was gonna say something, and then Christy answered just what.
Christy interrupted you, right?
But no, but then you reminded me of something else I was gonna say, and then I forgot it, so the question. Well, if I remember it, I'll just.
You can always come back to
shout.
it.
I'll just shout out. Oh, got it. In addition to, kind of like the front loading of information and relationship building and just making sure they have some contact point within the university, whether it's me or the health center or whatever. I've been doing every semester kind of like check-in, they're not really trainings, but that's my secret goal, with all the folks that work at the health center of just recognizing unique international student needs. And like how they can just be one other resource, and how they can identify just a few of those things that that might show up in different ways than the traditional domestic migrant student. And that's been really successful in just getting a few more touch points on campus.
I would love to hear from everybody on this. If you have words of wisdom, skills that you might draw on that would really help us as we sort of forge our careers in this world, I would love to hear from you what you think are just so important. Knowledge, skills, attitudes, whatever. The KSA. Be useful.
You want to go first?
Wow, yeah, it's painful.
Either and, go ahead.
The words of wisdom is to name tips and advice.
What do you know now that you wish you knew when you were a student? Or
That's
another
okay.
way?
All right, I'll just answer one part. I mean, there are many facets that I can answer in terms of that question in many angles, but I guess the first thing I would say is make sure you follow your passion and find a job that feels deeply meaningful to you. I personally can't really say what it would be like to accept a job because it would earn a lot of money and it's not meaningful to you because I've never done it. But I have accepted a lot of different kinds of jobs that have been super interesting to me, and that is the idea that the job resonates with my values and my expertise and all those things is very important. That said, keep in mind that whatever it is you're feeling called or directed to do, there may be things that can show up as roadblocks that you don't expect along the way. And I'm just going to tell you a tiny story that goes along with this. So I graduated from SIT in 2005, and at the time I still had kids in school. So I stayed here, I had a variety of different jobs, a bunch of different things happened, and eventually about 5 years ago, my daughter got married and had a baby, and I thought, oh my gosh, I have a granddaughter. I'm going to be back in this place of not being able to go abroad for a long time because I'm going to miss her. And I thought, I better go right now. While she's 1 year old, I need to go before she's old enough to say, Grandma, why do you live so far away? So I did this big search, and I got hired for an amazing job in Beijing. I speak Chinese. I've spent a lot of time in China and Taiwan and Tibet and India. And my capstone at SIT was on Tibetan refugees. And so I quit my job at Youth Services after 5 years. I'd been the director of programs there in a youth development program. I was getting all ready to go to Beijing, and I was all excited, and I had the summer to prepare, and I bought a new computer, and I did this, and I did that, and I got my work permit, and my visa didn't come from Beijing. And I asked it at the school, and they said, well, we don't know what's up, we'll see what we can do, and they checked, and I mean, I'll just make this long story shorter. My visa was denied. And my visa was denied after a very short interview with 3 questions, all about my involvement with Tibet, my publications, which was my capstone, which you can't even find online, but you can find a synopsis of it online. It's called To Life in Exile, Tibetan Women's Stories. And they asked me about my publications, and I said, I don't have any publications. I said, I work at Youth Services. I just wrote an article on marijuana and mental health. I don't have publications. I don't think you really are interested in that. They said, oh, yes, you do. Yes, you do. And I was like, what are you talking about? And honestly, at the time, I didn't even think of my capstone as a publication. But in retrospect, that was one of the things they were asking about. So my visa was denied. And I asked the school, is there any way we can appeal? And they said, no. So I was all ready to go live in China and have my dream job overseas while my granddaughter was a baby. And politics got in the way. And so I still haven't gone to live overseas, and now my granddaughter's 4, and she would definitely go away. But I go away for a month at a time or 6 weeks at a time, and that works. But just, I guess, so I would say, follow your passion, and also realize it may come back and bite you in the butt, and then you have to find something else. So actually, like I started these Meta Connection programs for adults. After my visa was denied, I went and spent 6 weeks in India at the school that I now lead programs to. And many wonderful things came from being denied, and actually I didn't miss that year with my granddaughter, and it all worked out. So I guess the moral of the story would be, follow the things you love, and yet if roadblocks show up, something else good will turn up too. Because there are many amazing ways you can use a career in international education, and it might not be what you necessarily think.
It's hard to get your foot in the door sometimes in international education, but once your foot is in the door,